Hello everyone, welcome to GGN. This is part 3, the final part for today. It's Wednesday, November 7th, 2012, and I'm Darko. Alright, we left off with this article, UN condemns Syrian military incursion into demilitarized zone. And it said here that the UN on Tuesday condemned the Syrian military's breach of the demilitarized zone between Israeli and Syrian Golan Heights on Saturday, calling it a violation of the 1974 disengagement agreement. And remember what I was talking about with Turkey, about as far as they said it's a big show what they're putting on with the hunger strike, where the guys are actually going to start dying pretty soon. Palestinian girl tries to goad soldiers into lashing out. A video documents 10-year-old cursing, spitting at soldiers in an attempt to provoke violent reaction that never comes. Sending children to provoke soldiers. Mind you, this is from Windet, so it's a Jewish website. A video shot at a protest rally held in the village of Nabi Salih in the central West Bank on Friday captured an uncanny moment showing how Palestinian protesters used children to needle IDF soldiers in hope of provoking a violent response. Familiar with the tactic, the soldiers did not fall for the obvious trap. The Palestinians residing in the area claim that settlers have illegally taken over nearby lands. There's the video, you can go in and check. At some point, a smoke grenade was fired at the protesters, but did not harm those shown in the video. But she said, they said after spitting at him, she continued shouting, "I spit in your face, go watch your mother. Instead of fighting little children, you're a traitor. You kill people to get money from dogs." The spokesman of the popular protest coordinated committee said, "I don't understand what the army wants. They send soldiers into a Palestinian village and then dare to depict themselves as, oh, here we go, as victims because their residents don't welcome them." Remember, that's their tactic. Oh, I've been victimized. But you have to remember, a lot of Palestinians are actually young people. They're not, they're either real young or they're real old. There's not a lot of, like, fighting men, men of fighting age there. They're mostly kids and old people. I mean, that's what's so horrible about this whole situation. I mean, you watch the video, there's videos on YouTube about this, and Israel or something like that, and it shows it's basically Israel expanding outward. They've already stolen the lands. It was I think it was 10% Jewish, and then they just took up 70% of the land and kicked everybody else into these settlements. And so when they go in there with these armored construction crews, armored plates and stuff, bulletproof glass, and go in there and just start demolishing homes, it's mostly children throwing rocks at tanks. I mean, that is the war. It's kids throwing rocks at tanks. It says to be a Palestinian means suffering an everlasting hope that has no remedy. After 6 decades, refugees have never given up hope to return, and they never will. It says that those who thought that the elderly will die and the young will forget, we haven't forgotten. We are still here, the young and the old, suffering the Israeli occupation's terror and continuing our struggle for justice. So it says here, to be a Palestinian is to be a revolutionary born to struggle, for all grandparents possess their keys and their faith in their cause. Now here we go. To be a Palestinian is to live maturely at a very young age, to grow up breathing politics, and to observe how the others trade with your life and your rights. To be a Palestinian is to keep cultivating the national principles in your children and grandchildren, and to warn them never to digress or lead the cause in a different direction. And lastly, to be a Palestinian is to never stop raising revolutionaries who will get what you couldn't live long enough to accomplish. So it's generational. And that's how the globalists actually work. They like to create generational warfare, but also they like to do things to the younger generations where the old people are so distracted with their jobs and they think they know everything. That's how they really get them. They have humongous egos, the older generations, and they think they know everything because they're old, Oh, I have all this wisdom and knowledge. No, you don't know shit. I hate to say it to a lot of people, but they don't. So and so then the younger generations are victimized, and then when they grow up and they're handed a ball of shit, and I'm sorry for swearing stuff in here, but it's just when they're handed that ball of crap, then the older generations say, well, you didn't work hard enough, right? So this is a generational war, and at least the Palestinians understand that. Israel to rush expansion of East Jerusalem settlements. So these Israeli anti-settlement group Peace Now has announced that Israel, or the Israeli Housing Ministry, has released publications showing 1,213 new tenders for housing units in East Jerusalem settlements a significant escalation in the expansion in the occupied city. This is, of course, before the elections. NATO cultivates ties with Armenia, seeking presence in Caucasus region. Armenia is known as a go-between for Russia and Iran trade around the sanctions. But this Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs and Security Policy and NATO Secretary General Special Representative for the Caucasus and Central Asia. Man, those people sound very important, don't they? Well, they don't make any of the decisions. I can bet my life that they don't make any decisions at all. They're just following whatever these think tanks and policymakers tell them to do. Stated that NATO seeks to increase its presence in the South Caucasus. Goes on and says, in addition, not only the statement itself is interesting, but the fact that they made the statement in Yerevan during the NATO-Armenia meeting. It goes on and says here that the General Special Representative for the Caucasus would hardly be so imprudent as to make a statement in Yerevan which would be accepted with jealousy in Moscow. The Kremlin or KGB wouldn't like the fact that Yerevan is becoming a platform for NATO to express its ambitions relating to South Caucasus. It goes on and says that these other countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, want to use the possibilities provided by NATO, all the goodies and stuff like that, and foreign investment, because that's what it's all about. And Azerbaijan is definitely pro-Israel. Georgia, even though they got a pro-Russian, they just got a pro-Russian president in there. I still don't trust him. But they're saying that it's interesting that they went to Armenia. It says because NATO chose Armenia as a place to deal with Russia. Does that mean that Armenia is the only pillar of the Russian policy in the southern Caucasus? And I saw this, a 5.1 earthquake hits Varzaqan in northwest Iran. So not all that exciting in and of itself, but where is northwest Iran? Well, if you look right here, here's northwest Iran. And, oh, there's Armenia, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. So, and, of course, there's a nice fault line right there. But, this is, I like to just look at stuff as like that, because when the New World Order wants to talk to you, they don't just talk to you. They actually do things to threaten you and blackmail you as well into doing something. Russia offers $1.3 billion for forced modernization of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So, $1 billion for the rearmament of Kyrgyzstan and $200 million need for the armed forces of Tajikistan. So pretty interesting. I mean, they get down to the bare bones of it, talking about because of the mountains in Kyrgyzstan, light motor vehicles, portable mortars, and possible deliveries of military uniforms, as well as expanded training of Kyrgyz military in Russian universities. So they've usually been a pro-Soviet, pro-Russian countries in Central Asia. But the reason to keep an eye on Central Asia, I think, is because it could be to where if there is any kind of actual hot war with, Patriot missiles or something like that, Central Asia is going to be stuck in the middle, I think, personally, because it falls between China, Russia, Europe, and stuff like that. And they'll just take those people and they'll just use them, because most of them are kind of poor and stuff, and they'll just blow those countries all to hell, contaminate them and stuff like that, because they're not going to want to blow up their own countries. Uzbekistan government busy preventing a color revolution. So I've mentioned this before about how West is trying to get a base in Uzbekistan as far as putting all of their gear and stuff from Afghanistan there, and also for the next front, which could be towards Russia. You can go there and check it out. I'm going to keep moving for time's sake, but it's talking about a cable entitled Uzbekistan Political Intrigue, Concern about a Color Revolution, and those are invoked usually by the West. Ukraine signs first gas deal with Germany. This is kind of a big deal. Ukraine just had elections, and they are pro-Russian, which is interesting because they just signed a deal with a EU country. Very interesting, because I've been covering this recently. They said, technically speaking, Ukraine's gas transportation system is designed to transport gas from Russia to Europe. So in order to diversify its energy sources, Kiev is striving to use its own gas transport capacity in a reverse direction. So they say that it makes, basically it's become about politics, this gas price cutting, because they have to deal with Gazprom, a Russian monopoly. So basically, this is the first awkward but successful attempt to break Gazprom's monopoly on gas exports to Ukraine. So looking out for themselves. Clinton thinks Azeri gas is important, and so should you. So basically, this is Hillary Clinton was going to other countries trying to tell them that you want to avoid Russian gas. Yeah, Clinton was saying it's an issue of democracy and human rights. After she said it's a matter of national security and global stability. Global stability. As I say, it sucks, man. You got to get dragged into this mess. You can't just be left alone. Daghestan becomes hotbed of North Caucasus insurgency. Covered this really briefly yesterday, but suicide bombings in police stations, Muslim clerics gunned down in broad daylight, shootouts between insurgents and security forces. They have become the run-of-the-mill headlines in Russia's troubled North Caucasus region of Daghestan. Analysts say Daghestan has unquestionably deteriorated in the most unstable republic in the North Caucasus. But why Daghestan? Well, I'll tell you why. They'll go on there and say widespread unemployment, poor living standards. Well, I'm sure all that's a result of their government. But this is the plan. UN neocon State Department behind terror wave in Russia. Barbarians at the gate. It says terrorism, the U.S. and the subversion of Russia. So the shooting and bombing in Daghestan this week can rekindle a long-standing brutal campaign of violence and terrorism in Russia's Caucasus region. So, yeah, it goes on here, says that in examining them, you can say that behind the scenes, the West is actively working to destabilize Russia with violence as their most potent weapon. The attacks are not simply isolated terrorist actions, but rather cynically orchestrated events carried out by well-connected criminal networks whose goal is to foment conflict and carry out the agenda of the U.S. intelligence establishment, and it's a subversion of Russia. I've gone through all this before. About this Doka Omarov, Russia's bin Laden, the boogeyman and Al-Qaeda. Propaganda clearinghouse, the Kafka Center, is funded by the U.S. State Department. Then you have this, Reuters lays groundwork for Western support of Al-Qaeda terrorists in Russia's Caucasus region. So the U.S. is openly supporting, arming, and literally cheering for Al-Qaeda in Syria. It'd be no surprise that their support for Al-Qaeda and other operations is now slowly revealing itself. For decades, these brutal terrorist campaigns have been carried out in Russia by Al-Qaeda's Caucasus Mountains faction, constituting the backbone of the so-called Chechen rebels. This was carried from the Foreign Policy website, and they actually said 2 cheers for Syrian Islamists, terrorists. I'm going to switch to the economy here. I'm going to move fast, so stick with me. Oil tumbles below $85 a barrel. And it was kind of lower for the elections, but it'll probably go up when everyone starts traveling for the holidays. Gold is on a tear. They're surging at a 2-week high in the wake of the Obama victory. They're betting this is a bad news for the U.S. dollar, which is in turn is supposed to be good for gold. But it's backed by oil, right? It's a petrodollar. So if there's weak demand for oil and the petrodollar goes down, they have to, invest in gold. I don't know. That's just the turning the knobs of this rigged economy. Stocks plunged 2% and the Dow skids 300 points over the concerns of a fiscal cliff. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to cut a lot. Obama's going to cut a lot of stuff. They can only print so much money, inflate, and they can only take on so much debt because the Federal Reserve System can only keep interest rates artificially low for so long. And they're not going to start a war because people are tired of war. So they're just going to cut like Greece. They just passed that package. Which is why one day after the elections, Obama is pushing a carbon tax to cut the U.S. deficit. Go figure, guys. See, I told you, I knew that storm had something to do with climate change because I kept talking about it. Gunmaker shares rise after Obama re-election. Shares were up 7.6%. Then Prop 37 to label GMO foods fails in California. Nationwide polls show 90% of Americans support GMO labeling. How are you going to fight these conglomerates? $45 million at the drop of a bucket. Monsanto, DuPont, Pepsi. Well, they get that money from all the savings by putting all that poison in your food. Justice Department drug laws remain unchanged following the passage of marijuana initiatives, so they're still gonna keep it illegal. U.S. per person debt is now 35% higher than that of Greece. Yo, guys, $53,000 per slave. The U.S. is no longer the world's 10 most prosperous countries for the first time. This is blowback from economic warfare. Recession quadrupled suicide rate. Additional 1.5 thousand deaths per year. Trillions of dollars worth of stock certificates were stored in a vault and may have suffered water damage. Kind of like 9/11. Then New Jersey orders a rationing system for filling up gas tanks. Bloomberg says he wants 40,000 to be evacuated. Even U.S. Marines are staged off the coast. New York, New Jersey forced to evacuate again over the coming snowstorm. And FEMA, just like they didn't have enough generators, FEMA Center closed due to bad weather. They're going to shut down. This is why you need a government, right?